Yo, what up? It's Khalid Salam. I'm back with another episode of the Peace Seekers podcast. This is a continuation of the last video that I posted, why I converted to Islam. So this is part 2 to that video, which I will recap shortly some of the things we talked about. But I would really suggest, if you are new to my channel or this is your first time viewing a video, or if you are familiar with the channel but you haven't seen the last video, I highly suggest that you go back and listen to that video, because I'm just going to hit the treetops with what I talked about there. I go into a lot more detail about my upbringing and my mindset and what really led me down my spiritual journey, or my journey to wanting to connect with God more, have a closer connection, and really build that connection from the ground up. So I'm going to continue with where we left off, but I just want to kind of touch on a few of the points that I talked about. Number one, the first thing that I spoke about was my reason for making this video. It's been something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I feel like now is the perfect time to do so. With everything that's going on in the world, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of the things that we see going on with the election. I'm recording this video the Sunday before the 2024 election. So by the time this video comes out, we'll probably already know who the president is, president-elect. But a lot of uncertainty, a lot of there's a lack of trust in government officials, especially in America and in the West and all over the world in general. A lot of people feel we are living in some of the most chaotic times that the world has seen. One thing about studying religion, and even going back to the Bible or the Quran, what you'll find is that much of what we're going through today, nations went through in the past. Lack of trust in leadership, lack of trust in government, issues amongst each other, issues within society, cultural issues. And the whole reason that God sent prophets to people was to get them back on the path of righteousness when they have fallen off. And so that's a large reason why I'm doing this video, to kind of touch on some of the things I spoke about before. I talked about growing up in a single parent household, not having any male leadership or male guidance, being raised in and around gang culture in the West. I grew up in the Midwest, Columbus, Ohio, in the inner city. So a lot of Bloods, a lot of Crips, going to school with a lot of these individuals. I spoke about dealing with loss at an early age, being 13 years old when the first person that I knew had gotten killed due to gun violence. And subsequently after that, many individuals that I knew, people I went to school with, many of them were killed, and many of the people I know have killed people. So I spoke a little bit about that. I spoke about dealing with trauma. I spoke about moving from my neighborhood around 14, 15 years old into a home with my mom and dad, which previous to that, I grew up in a single parent household. And that came with a lot of issues, which I'm going to speak about a little bit more in this video. But I left off with telling a story about how my worldview of the gang life and what it was to be a man and what it was to be honorable, what it meant, or how to treat women, and all the cultural norms and all of the cultural norms and standards that we live by growing up in these kind of circumstances. I spoke about a story of when all of that came crashing down. And forgive me, because in the last video I had shed a few tears. But it is an emotional topic for me, because where I am today, I realize how easy it is to mislead people. I realize that many of us were misled into believing that a certain standard of life was the life to live. And so now, being a Muslim, now growing and being married and having a child of my own, and having, hit levels of success, relative levels of success, I realize so many people that I know have lost their lives. They've lost their freedom because of an ideology. And before we get further into everything, I want to just say one of the things I always try to get across to people when we have conversations about religion. I always tell people everybody has a religion. You have people who say, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. You got people who say, I don't believe in God. You got people who say, no religion is true. And what I always try to get across to people is to think about religion in terms of lifestyle practices and choices. Because although, yes, as Muslims, we say that we practice Islam, we practice the religion of Islam, and we practice what we do because this is what we are told to do by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Christian will say that they practice what they practice because of Jesus, or because, Jesus is God, according to the Christian belief, which we'll dive a little bit into that here shortly. But the reality of it is, everyone has lifestyle practices. Everyone has lifestyle choices and things they do on a day-to-day basis. Many of those things become almost ritualistic. And so if you can get in the mindset of understanding religion in that way, I think it will be much easier for you, if you're on a path to wanting to understand what the truth is. It'll be a lot easier for you to understand the concept and the reason behind religion. And therefore, as you go through your life trying to come to the conclusion of what belief system is right, opposed to others, it'll be a lot easier for you, because you won't have this natural, you won't have this disdain for the concept of religion. You get what I'm saying? Because if you understand that you have lifestyle practices and you do what you do for the reasons that you do it, and then we do what we do as Muslims because this is what Allah has commanded of us, now we need to figure out whether or not there is a God, whether or not Islam is true, whether or not the Prophet Muhammad was a true or false prophet. These are the questions we need to start looking at from an analytical perspective. And I'm not going to break all that down in this video. We could do that in future videos, or, there are many people, many students of knowledge, many scholars who have videos online who have far more knowledge than me when it comes to Islam. What I'm here to do today is to try to bridge a gap in the understanding of people who watch this video and the previous video, and the even videos I've done prior to this and videos I'll do after. My only interest is to bridge the gap of people dealing with mental health issues and people searching for the truth of who and what God is. Because it is my humble opinion that depression and anxiety are spiritual afflictions, right? They are the consequence of lack of knowledge of the spiritual world, our purpose, why God has created us, who God is, and how we are supposed to identify ourselves. I think when anybody is suffering from depression and anxiety, Usually there's a lack in the same 3 areas that I've mentioned before. I've done a separate video on this called the 3-question theory. I'm actually in the process of writing a book on this as well. Origin of life. Where does life originate from? Is there a God? Is there not a God? Is God a man? Is God not a man? Can God be a man? Is Islam the truth? Is Christianity the truth? These are questions we have to ask ourselves. The second point to that is, what is your purpose? We have to understand where life originates from in order to understand purpose. There's nothing that we can point to in our observable reality that we will try to attribute a purpose to, knowing that we did not create and design that thing. So why is it that when it comes to our life as human beings, we believe we have the ability to then choose our own purpose when we did not even choose to be here? We did not choose to exist. This was a decision that was made for us. And the third aspect where people have a lack is identity. And so in the last episode, I talked a lot about identity, struggling with identity, struggling with the standards of society, struggling with the standards of the culture that I was raised in, and how many of my friends struggle with that culture and the consequences that come with that. And so to get right into this part of the video, I think that's a good segue, because in the last video, the last thing I spoke about was my identity being crumbled, being crushed. My whole worldview was flipped upside down because I had a conversation with an individual where I was confronting him for claiming to be a blood. And I come from a blood neighborhood where people have really lived and died for this ideology. And I was offended by him claiming this, being in an area where in which there are no gangs. And his response to me, it shook me to the core, because it made me realize that everything we were raised to believe and practice was a lie. And that was the first time my worldview had been crushed. Continuing on, there was a similar circumstance that I experienced later in life as I started to look into religion. But before we get there, I want to speak about the stage that I went through, later after this conversation. So at the age of 17, I started going to therapy. I spoke about being in a state of mind where I would wake up in the morning and just cry. And I had no reason that I could pinpoint as to why that was. I spoke about having suicidal thoughts about taking my own life. And to spare you all the details of that, I called my mom one day after school, after one of these, moments of breakdown. And I called my mom and I told her, Mom, something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is, but I felt like I was going crazy because I felt as though I could not control my own emotions. And there's a difference between overreacting, because people will say, people who overreact, they can't control their emotions, which is fair. But there's a difference between overreacting and Alhamdulillah. There's a difference between overreacting and that being associated with not being able to control your emotions, and overreacting to the point of not being able to pinpoint why you are actually dealing with said emotion. And so I call my mom. I tell her something's going on with me. I don't know what's going on. I can't control my emotions. I feel strange. And my mom, being the loving mom that she is, she knew that she wasn't equipped to teach me how to figure it out. So she, in her wisdom, set me up to go to a therapist. And it was through therapy that I was diagnosed with depression, major depression and anxiety. I started to be able to define these terms and how these terms are associated with the behavior patterns that I had, which was a great starting point for me. And if you're familiar with the episode that I did called The 5 Steps to Emotional Literacy, another concept that I'm in the process of writing about, hopefully, that'll probably be the first book that I release, inshallah. But the first step in the 5 steps to emotional literacy is therapy. And the reason that I put that first before anything is because people have to understand what it is they're dealing with in order to come up with a plan to solve for what they're dealing with. All the rest of the steps, I always say, can go in any order. And as you go through emotions in life, you'll have to utilize these steps in order to overcome them, because emotion is a natural human trait. It's not like, once you solve for one thing, there will not be other issues that you deal with, and you can still use those same 5 steps. I just always say you try to utilize therapy first, at least in the beginning of your healing journey, so you can actually have a term and a definition to what it is you're dealing with. I always relate it to the concept of putting a face to the enemy. Depression, anxiety are tricks and traps of the enemy. And so when you know what you're dealing with, you can actually put a real plan in place. Otherwise, you're just going to go to therapy for 20 years dealing with the same issues. Or if you end up not going to therapy, you're going to be dealing with the same issues for 20 years trying to figure out what the issue is. So therapy kind of gives you a leg up. It kind of, gives you a head start to healing, because you can actually understand what it is that you're dealing with. Now, sometimes that cripples individuals, and, that's something we could talk about in future episodes. But so I go to therapy, get diagnosed with major depression, anxiety. But it's through this that I actually understand, no, you're dealing with something. It's not that you're crazy. Which, let me speak about this for just a quick second, because so many people are dealing with depression and anxiety and don't even know it. So many people are trying to figure out why it is that they feel the way that they feel and what it is that they feel. And if you were to just go to a relatively decent therapist, usually they will be able to break this down for you. Excuse me. And so it was through that I was able to realize, no, you're not crazy. You are dealing with something as the result of all of these things that you've been through in your life. And at 17, 17 is young. But there's so many things that I had experienced by the age of 17. There were so many things I experienced before 10 years old. Something, like I said, there were some things that I didn't even speak about on the podcast, because I think some of those things deserve their own video. But even the small issues, like the kid stealing my video game that I let him borrow, all of these things compounded. All of these things add up. And because we're not taught to deal with them properly, we're not taught how to process them. It's like if you were to pour juice on the floor, put your rug over top of it. Think about all the issues that will cause. Think about all the ants and all the bugs that are going to be crawling under there. Think about how sticky the floor is going to be once the juice dries and the sugars create that sticky mask over top of it. Yeah, the rug's over top. Yeah, you may not be able to see all of those problems, but the problems are still there. They're still present. In fact, not dealing with it and cleaning it up immediately or in a timely fashion, it causes more problems. Because when you pour the juice on the floor, the ants don't just automatically attract to it right then and there. No, you have time to solve for the issue. But because we let it fester, because we don't understand how to clean up our issues, We allow those issues to fester, and then more problems just compound and more problems climb on top. And then you get to a point where you hit your breaking point. And this is where many people opt to just check out of life. Self-deletion. Got to be careful with what we say on these platforms. But you all understand what I'm saying. That's when people decide to end it all, because there's so much that has happened that they feel as though there's nothing that can be done about it. And I tell people all the time, I have been there. There is a solution. There is a solution. But it does take work. It does take effort in order to heal. It's not the easiest process in the world. And sometimes it can even cause pain because of the emotion that you have to go through in order to heal from these things. But the reality of it is, there is light at the end of the tunnel. But you have to put your trust in Allah. You have to put your trust in God. You have to put your faith in God. And many people will say, well, how can I do that? Right? Especially if you're someone coming from a non-Muslim background, and I'm using these terms. How can I put my faith in something that I don't know? And that is exactly the problem. We are not taught about God. We are not taught about the reality of it. And many of the religions and ideologies that try to solve for God have inherent issues built into them. So even when we try to build a foundation on these false concepts of God, they crumble because the foundation is weak. The foundation is not strong. It's not backed historically. It's not backed in preservation. It's not backed in tradition, oral or written. There are holes within the foundation. And so even when you try to build upon it, it may feel fresh. It may feel like relief for a period of time. But eventually you will get to the point again and again and again where you start to feel that crumble under your feet, because these beliefs, these ideologies, these cultural norms, societal norms, they're not built to sustain you as a human being. They're not built to sustain your soul and fulfill your soul. They are built usually to take advantage of you. In the last episode, I spoke about being a musician. I used to make music, used to rap, produce, record, engineer sessions. I used to use music and writing to cope. I still write, my thoughts down and poems and things like that to cope, but I haven't done music in a long time. I did an episode, I'll link it, the detrimental factors of pacifying issues. And I talked about how we utilize outside sources to pacify what it is that we feel. So at this, when I was 17, I converted to Islam at 19. I don't know if I mentioned that in the last video, but it'll be in the title. From 17 to 19, I graduated high school. I was partying, drinking, smoking, even though I never enjoyed smoking. I never enjoyed drinking. I never really even enjoyed partying. I'm a loner by nature. I'm a introvert. I can turn the extrovert on when I need to, but I'm an introvert by nature. I like to be in my own seclusion. But I would enter into these realms of society because my programming, what I was raised upon, what I saw around me said, this is what you do. And I was the most depressed that I had ever been at that period of time. And smoking, drinking, partying, making music just trying to deal with the things that I was going through in life, not realizing that these things just make it more and more difficult to heal, because you build a over reliance on these things. Think about all the people who go out and drink. Think about people who smoke all day long. Think about people who pop pills. Pill popping in America, for those who are listening to this who don't live in America. Taking prescription drugs that are not even prescribed to you is at an all-time high in America. We have a opioid epidemic in America right now. And for the black men who are listening to this, and just know, this is an issue that affects us as black men more than it affects anybody else. There used to be a time when I was young where people only would smoke and drink. In our community, in the black community especially. To do anything outside of that, you were shamed for doing. Now, you could do almost any drug and there will be no shame that comes to you. Nobody will say anything because it's become so culturally acceptable through the music, through society, through entertainment. It's become so acceptable to pop pills, snort cocaine, drink lean. This has become such an acceptable thing within society. Nobody ever even bats an eye at it. And it's affecting us the most as black men. It's affecting all of Americans, but black men usually are the ones that die from opioid overdoses the most. I was prescribed antidepressants at 17. When I was, I think, 18, I ended up going to a psychiatrist, and this actually helped me a little bit because my levels of serotonin and dopamine, vitamin D were so low. I needed something to assist me. And so I'm not going to say I'm completely against prescription medications prescribed to you for your specific situation. I'm not going to say I'm completely against that, right? Somebody, like I said, there are people who know way more than me in terms of, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable within Islam. So I'll save that conversation for someone else to answer, but I can only speak to what actually assisted me. And this assisted me because what it did was it gave me a baseline. My levels were so low, I needed something to just get me to a normal level. And so I was on prescription medication, and I was smoking, and I was drinking, partying, making music, engaging in certain activities that you shouldn't be engaging in, just to feel better about life. And before I graduated high school, I did want to make mention of this. Before I graduated high school, I had read this book my dad had bought me like years prior to this. He had bought me the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And it was the first book that I ever read that I actually chose to sit down and read. Like, I picked it up and said, I want to read this. Every other book that I had ever read up to that point was things that I had to read for school. And in this book, Malcolm X, he lived very similar circumstances to what many of us from the inner city live. He grew up selling drugs. His father was killed when he was young, so he grew up single parent household. He, along with his siblings, were taken away from his mother and put into foster care. He was a criminal at a point in time and then ended up going to prison. It was in prison that he was introduced to the Nation of Islam. And then later on, when he did Hajj, his pilgrimage to Mecca, is when he realized the truth of what Islam really teaches. Before that, he had the black nationalist beliefs that the Nation of Islam presents, that they mix Islam with falsehood. They mix Islam with their own interpretations of things and create this black nationalist or black hierarchy belief and system and try to pass it off as if it's Islam, and it's not. But that was my first introduction to someone being a Muslim who was not an Arab, right? An Arab. Prior to that, I had never even considered that people can convert from one religion to another. I never even considered that. I was raised in a Christian household. My grandmother was Roman Catholic. I was raised to believe Jesus is God. I was raised to believe he's the Son of God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the Trinity. I was raised to believe that Jesus died for our sins, because without that death, without that atonement for sin, there's no way we could get away from it. I was raised believing that. But I wasn't in a strict religious family. I didn't feel like it was forced on me. I didn't have the whole church hurt, kind of background or anything like that. To be honest, religion wasn't really a big thing in my family. We didn't go to church every Sunday. We didn't go to church on most holidays. Every now and again we might go to church. But it wasn't like a big ordeal to me. I had a friend of mine that was a little bit more in the church because his family played in the church choir and the band and everything. They played, piano, keyboard, organs, drums, things of that nature. Sung the songs and everything. And so I would go to church with him from time to time. But it wasn't a big thing in my life. And so I was a avid listener of Malcolm X. Anything that's on the internet today of Malcolm X, any of his speeches, his lectures, his debates, I've probably watched every single one of them online. I was that invested, just because to see that change. And he was someone who was intelligent. And I was always inclined to learning, but because of my cultural standards, I left that to the wayside, because being smart was not cool, which is dumb. But being smart was not cool. And so my grades, they weren't the best in middle school, high school. They weren't the best. I did enough to pass. I could have did way more. I could have done way more. Because I actually do enjoy learning. But it just wasn't cool or impressive or anything to be smart where I came from. So it just wasn't what I did. And but I was always interested in that. And the way he was able to articulate himself, I really took a liking to. And I think through this and through the qadr of Allah, my YouTube algorithm started to suggest videos of Muslims debating Christians. I think probably because I watched a lot of debates, a lot of Malcolm's debates. And I came across the EF Dawa YouTube channel. And if you're familiar with EF Dawa, there are many different people that have debated on that platform at Hyde Park, I believe is where it is. But one of them that stood out to me was the brother Hamza, because he was a white revert, a white Englishman that converted to Islam. Which again was just interesting to me, because again, we all have this idea of what a Muslim is based off of society. You got the extremists that think, Muslims are these terrorists that want to, and place the Sharia on everybody. And if you don't believe in Allah and convert to Islam, then they're going to kill you. That's what a lot of people think, about. I won't say a lot of people, but there are some people that believe that. And then for many of us, we just don't we don't pay it much attention. And so we have this idea of men in the thobes, women with the hijab, fully covered. And, we know they don't eat pork. Many of us know they don't drink, but we just don't give it a lot of thought, and we don't give it a lot of thought or a lot of interest. We don't look into it much. And so I never considered the fact that people can just convert to any religion almost. except for like Judaism, then it's a little bit different. But we won't get into what's going on in the Middle East as the result of a specific group of individuals. We won't get into it. We'll say that for another day. But it was through Malcolm and the brother Hamza at EF Dawa that I said to myself, that's interesting. I'm going to speed this up for the sake of time. Watching these videos has sparked a lot of questions in me. I never in my life thought to really question religion. I always had certain questions about Christianity. I always wondered certain things, like homosexuality being a sin. When I was young, that used to really, I'm not going to say bother me, not because I don't have any dog in the fight, but the way people would present it was like, if you're gay, you're going to burn in hell. That's it. If you sin, you're going to burn in hell. Sex outside marriage, you're going to burn in hell. Like, that's just how it's presented. And so I had a natural disdain towards religion for a while. Not because I necessarily disagreed with that, but just why? Explain it to me. But no one ever really explains anything to you in Christianity. And even when they do, it doesn't make sense. And so I started watching these videos, and it got me to asking certain questions like, how can God be a man? How can God be God the Father, but also the Father's God, but then the Son is God and the Spirit is God? But it's not three gods. It's one God and three persons. But then God, when he comes down as a man, he's God, but he gets killed. But then it's like God can't die. So I was left with a lot of confusion. And it seemed as though when people would ask Muslims questions, they always had an answer. They always had an answer. I found that very interesting. And so what I did was I went and I bought a Bible. I think I probably bought like a KJV probably. Not even aware of the differences in the Bible. See, I always thought the differences of the Bible were just translation. Because that's what a lot of Christians say. That's what a lot of Christians profess. Well, the differences are just differences in, the thous and the theys and the these and the those and the no. It is much deeper than just translation. So much so to the point where, different beliefs under the Christian umbrella, they have different numbers of books between the different versions, the KJV, NIV, all of these different versions of the Bible. There are some that have certain stories in them that others don't, certain verses, certain concepts, certain wording. And wording is very important, especially when we're translating it into English from the Semitic languages. And then understanding that Jesus spoke Aramaic, and some say he also spoke Hebrew. And these languages have been translated from Aramaic to Greek, Hebrew to Greek. Then you got Latin manuscripts, Greek manuscripts, Hebrew manuscripts. And all these translations, you got all these translations all the way up to English. And that creates so many issues. But I went and I got a Bible, I think probably KJV, and I bought a Quran. Because they will make a lot of mentions of these verses to prove their points. And so I wanted to know, because I didn't just accept what Muslims said, because I don't have any reason to trust either one more than the other. So I wanted to see if what they were saying was true and if it was actually there in the scriptures, because people could be making anything up. I had never read the Quran at that point. I had never even read the Bible in its entirety at that point. And so I went and I got a Bible and a Quran so I could, cross-reference what these individuals were saying. And what I had come to realize was this is my opinion, there's a direct link between depression and anxiety, the feeling of being lost in life, and not having authenticity in believing what you believe. There's a link between that. And so I didn't have authenticity with my cultural standards, but I also didn't have authenticity in my religious standards either. Again, I wasn't raised in a strictly religious household. But even if I was, Christianity is not equipped to create strong foundation in an individual because there are too many inconsistencies. There's only one Quran. There are multiple versions of the Bible. All Qurans have the same amount of chapters, same amount of verses. Different versions of the Bible have different things. In Islam, we say Allah is one. He's not a man. He's not an animal. He's not his creation. He's outside of his creation. And we have 99 names and attributes that he has given to us. There are more than that, but 99 names and attributes that we refer to better understand who God truly is. The Christians want to tell you that God became his creation. And because he was either incapable or unwilling to forgive you for being born into a sin that you had no say in, he had to come down as his creation and die on the cross to atone for the sins of humanity. And after he did that, now all sins are forgiven. All you have to do is believe in Jesus Christ and believe that he's your Lord and Savior and believe that he's God. It doesn't make sense. Simple and plain. It just doesn't make sense. And then when you start getting into the historicity of the Bible, get into textual criticism, it gets even more confusing. Because then you start to realize all of the different authorities that have had a say in what the Bible would actually say, right? Then you start to realize there is a very specific narrative and there are historical implications as to why these narratives are there. Just like Jesus being God. If you look, I'm not going to make this into a breakdown of the Bible or the Quran, but if you look at the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then you look at John, which Matthew, Mark, and Luke being the synoptic Gospels, you look at John. John, the book of John, the Gospel of John, has very specific Trinitarian concepts in it. If you look at the synoptic Gospels, you don't have that. And although those Gospels were written earlier, many people reflect on John the most because it's through the book of John that we really get a sense of how certain verses, although not explicit, certain verses can have implicit Trinitarian implications. Like the verse where Jesus is said to have said, I and the Father are one. This is something many Christians will try to utilize in order to convince people that Jesus is claiming that he's God. But he doesn't ever say, I am God. So all these verses that they try to allude to, right? And there are Christian scholars who will try to explain this away. Well, if he said that he was God, he would have been killed a lot earlier. This is something that a lot of people will try to say. But Again, I'm not going to make this into like a breakdown of the Quran or the Bible. I'm just saying a lot of it just doesn't make sense. And with Islam, it's simple. God created us with the purpose of worshiping him. And he created life to give us the opportunity to do that so that we can earn our way into paradise. We can earn our way through his grace, through his mercy, and through his will. And it's through the worship of God that we benefit now and we will benefit later. And you will make mistakes. You will sin. And for that, he's created repentance. The opportunity for you to sincerely seek forgiveness from him and his ability to forgive you by his will. No one has to die. He doesn't have to sacrifice anyone. He doesn't have to become his creation. He knows you're going to make mistakes. He knows you are, because we are created weak. And so, worship him, repent when you mess up, and he'll forgive you. It's simple. To kind of get ready to close this out, I want to talk about two things. Foundation, well, really three things. Foundation, authenticity, and then finally me accepting Islam. My foundation was weak since I was young. I wasn't raised to have these strict religious beliefs. I wasn't raised with strong leadership. And because of that, I went out into the world to find it. I became of the world. That's something a lot of Christians say. And that's something that I kind of agree with. We become of the world. In Islam or in the Arabic language, we say the dunya, right? We focus more on the dunya than we do on the hereafter, right? We focus on the worldly life. And the worldly life is not just material possessions. It's not just being materialistic. It is focusing on the standards that society has in place on men and women. Adopting those morals and principles. And then living our life by that. When Allah, God, has created a standard for us, a perfected standard. There's a verse in the Quran where Allah says, "Today I have perfected for you your religion." He's given us a perfect way of life, a perfect set of standards. And then he preserved it. He didn't allow anyone to change it. He didn't allow for it to go through and suffer from the same issues that the previous prophets and messengers' messages had. He allowed for the preservation of the Quran. He allowed for the preservation of the Sunnah, the way of the Prophet. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He allowed for it to be preserved in its original form so that we don't have to deal with the confusion that comes with all of these other belief systems. It's through his grace and his mercy and his will that we have a perfected standard, an objective standard, where he answers for those same three issues that I said all people who are dealing with depression and anxiety deal with. He tells you who he is, the 99 names and attributes. He tells you why he created us. Do not think that I've created mankind or jinn except but to worship me. He tells us how to identify ourselves by following the Sunnah. Right? By following what he's commanded of us in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. we as Muslims are required to separate ourselves from the disbelievers. Meaning not to mimic what they do. And why would we when we have a perfected way of life? Allah has extended the opportunity to us all to embrace the religion of Islam. And he didn't make it difficult. He didn't make it painful. He didn't make us, have to shed blood. He didn't make us have to get jumped in. He didn't make us have to deal with pain in order to become Muslims or to revert to Islam, because we believe we're all born Muslim. We're all born in submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He made it easy for you and for me. And so as I came to learn about these things, as I came to learn and understand who Allah is, who the Prophet Muhammad is, peace and blessings be upon him, how Islam has always been from the beginning of time. There's only ever been one religion, but we deviate from that path, and we've created all of these offshoots, all the way down to our current ideologies of today, where we try to come up with our own concepts of why life, why we are here, what our purpose is, what happens after death, how we should identify ourselves. Does God care about this or does he not care about this? Right? To a point where some people will say God has a sense of humor. Like, just think about what we're saying. Think about what we're doing. And this is why I go back to the things that are going on in the world today. Previous generations were dealing with the exact same things. Which is why Allah, in his mercy, revealed the Quran to guide people back to the truth when they deviated from it. And so remember, you are in the place that you are in your life today, the state of mind that you are in, the mindset that you have, depression and anxiety. We are dealing with these things as a result of not aligning with God's will. And I'm not going to say it's completely your fault, because we are programmed and indoctrinated since young. We are all born Muslim. But it's through the teachings of our parents and society and the cultural norms and our upbringing that we will deviate off of that path. But we are all born Muslim. We are all born as ones who submit to the will of Allah. But our lives and things we go through, it pulls us away from that. And we'll be raised to be Jews or Christians or atheists or fire worshipers, or ones who believe in nationalism, or people who believe in statues and these carved idols, or praying to the trees, or praying to our ancestors, or reliance on the zodiac signs, and reliance on these horoscopes, and reliance on these politicians, and reliance on gang culture and what society and entertainers and musicians say. It's even to the point now musicians are trying to tell us who we should vote for, who we should not vote for, and why. We have a over-reliance on the worldly life, and we are not reliant on Allah. And when all of those things fail you, think about that verse. Those who turn away from the remembrance of Allah will have a depressed life, because we are not living our lives in line with what he has ordained. Everything you've heard me talk about on this channel, all the previous lessons I've talked about, are rooted in Islam. I just try to make it in a way that's digestible for all people. The 3-question theory, origin of life, purpose, identity, the 5 steps to emotional literacy, right? Pacifying issues, the detrimental factors of comparisons. We've talked about all of these things. Healing from childhood traumas for black men. Like, we've talked about all of these things. And so I hope that you can understand as a takeaway from this point, if you've learned anything from any of my videos up to this point or anything I've posted online, understand where these concepts originate from. If you follow anything that I've done, and you shouldn't follow me, but if you take anything away from what I've done, open up that Quran, read it for yourself. Learn from the people of knowledge that are online, because there's so much access these days. I'm not a person of knowledge. I'm not a student of knowledge. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a sheikh. I'm not any of these things. I'm just someone who truly believes in the truth of Islam and what it has done for my life. I am just trying to convey that message to you. And so I finalize with, I was eventually pushed over the edge to embrace Islam by the grace of Allah. And I took my Shahada. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship but Allah, and that the Prophet Muhammad is his last and final prophet and messenger. It's simple. You don't have to get dunked in the water. You don't have to donate any money. You don't have to shed blood. You don't have to be beat on, like how in the previous video I talked about, in order to be initiated into the gang that was in my area. You had to get jumped by multiple individuals in order to be there. Women in gangs a lot of times have to have sex with multiple individuals in order to claim that she's from there. We have to invest this money into a lot of these communities in order to be from these groups or these cults or these ideologies. But Allah only asks you to bear witness to his greatness and to embrace his prophet, his messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Islam is the cure to depression and anxiety. I will stand on that 10 toes down from now until I'm weak in the knees, blue in the face. In closing, it's already been over an hour. I'm going to get ready to go. As I continue to drop videos on this channel, inshallah, I want to speak more about the connection between what I'm talking about and with Islam. But I want to do it in a format that's acceptable for all people. But I think this is a good starting point to where I want the channel to go. You won't always see me in a thobe. You won't always see, you won't always see me in the Islamic garb. I'm a black man from America, bro. You know what I'm saying? We wear, hoodies and sweatsuits, and, I'm from the Midwest. So I just felt like this was fitting for this video today. And so, yeah, man. As always, man, it's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you to everybody who's watched, everybody who's subscribed. I've been gone from the channel for a while. Been slacking, but as I said, I got a lot of things going on in life, man. I'm married man now, child now, and just trying to blend it all. So I'll be back soon, inshallah, with more videos. I wanted to do a video on the election, but it is what it is, bro. As always, man, thank you all for listening. Make sure you like, share, subscribe this video. Follow me on Instagram at Honorable Khalid. Follow me on Twitter at Abu Rumea. And And make sure you subscribe to the podcast, man. Go find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere you find your podcast. I'm probably there. And I'll see you all next time, man. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon each and every one of you. And may he open your heart to the truth of Islam. Peace.